Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Shortly into Rodney Alcala's career into the military, his superior officer would diagnose him as being vindictive, malevolent, and insubordinate. It wouldn't be till years later that therapists would do a deeper dive into these diagnoses and find that Rodney Alcala had narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, malignant narcissism with psychopathy, and sexual sadism. It is said during his time in the military there will be several occurrences where Rodney Alcala would assault women, and he would be reprimanded by the military, but he would just continue these offenses. And it's at some point after these assaults that Rodney Alcala would refer to it as having a nervous breakdown. For whatever reason, Rodney Alcala would have a nervous breakdown, and he would actually go AWOL in the military and actually run from where he was in Fort Bragg in North Carolina to his mother's home in Los Angeles, California. After being discharged from the military, it's there that Rodney Alcala would enroll into UCLA at the Arts of Architecture, as he would try to pursue a career in photography. It's also around there that he began boasting about having an IQ of over 135. And this obsession with being in photography will be very important later on down the road. And then we would come to the morning of September 25th, 1968. On September 25th, 1968, a passing by motorist would actually be driving down the road, and he would notice an 8-year-old girl, Tally Shapiro, being ushered into a car by a wavy-haired man. Seeing that the car would go to an apartment and where he was escorting the girl into the apartment, the man would actually turn around to go to the nearest payphone. So he would call the police and tell the police that he was in fear that the little girl's life may have been in danger. Officer on call, Chris Camacho, would actually walk up to the apartment and begin knocking on the door, to where Chris would respond and say that a head would peer out of the window and open the door would be a very undressed Rodney Alcala. And he would tell Chris Camacho that he had just gotten out of the shower, to which Chris Camacho would tell him, "You have 10 seconds to get dressed because otherwise I'm kicking down the door." Chris Camacho would kick down the door to where Rodney Alcala was not in sight in the apartment. But however, what he would find in the apartment was much worse. As he walked around the apartment, he could find in the kitchen 8-year-old Tally Shapiro laying on the kitchen floor. And Chris Camacho would say that there was blood everywhere and that Tally Shapiro would be laying unconscious on the kitchen floor covered in blood with a metal pipe laid across her neck. And it's there that Chris Camacho would learn that this would be the pipe that Rodney Alcala had used to not only beat Tally Shapiro, but also sexually assault her as well. It is there Chris Camacho had theorized that if it had not been for the motorist who had called the police so quickly, that Tally Shapiro would not be alive today. Now, while all this was going on, Rodney Alcala would actually flee California. After fleeing the police, Rodney Alcala would go from California to New York, and he would continue going to a university in New York and enroll in NYU. But while he was in New York, he would go under a different alias and start using the name John Berger. While he was enrolled at NYU, it is said that he would study under Roman Polanski. Now, while Rodney Alcala was at NYU studying under Roman Polanski, the police would take Tally Shapiro to the hospital to do everything they could for her. The authorities had been called right in the nick of time and would arrive at the right time to save Tally Shapiro's life. It is said that during this, she would actually be in a coma from the beating for 32 days. After Rodney Alcala would evade the police after the Tally Shapiro assault, he would quickly become a wanted person. not only becoming a wanted person, he would find himself on the FBI's top most wanted list, as they were doing everything in their power trying to find the man that had tried to grape and unalive an 8-year-old girl. And Rodney Alcala would attend NYU up until a point in time, in June 12, 1971, where 23-year-old flight trans assistant Cornelia Crilly was actually found unalive and graped, where she was found in her apartment on 427 East 83rd Street. We now know that Rodney Alcala had gotten into contact with Crilly now, but at the time, the police did not know what had happened with Crilly, as it was just completely random. No sign of breaking and entering had been found in the apartment of Crilly, so it was suffice to say that someone had let him inside her house, and this person had manually asphyxiated Crilly by using some of her nylon stockings. And her schmurder would actually go unsolved until 2011. Now, even though we don't really know what happened on that night, so I will just go and say allegedly. So allegedly, on the night that Crilly was unalived, she would notice Rodney Alcala moving some furniture around this apartment complex to where he would ask for her help. She would help him. She would invite him over to his place, at which point not only would he attack Crilly, he would grape her, and then he would unalive her by asphyxiating her. And it's after this murder that Rodney Alcala would leave the state of New York. But he would not go very far, and he would actually run from New York to New Hampshire and would get a job as a camp counselor at George Mills on Lake Sunapee. Now this time Rodney Alcala was going under the alias John Berger, slightly different from the alias he was using in New York as John Berger. Now, for whatever reason, two of the teen campers that were going to camp at the time would actually be walking to a post office, and they would walk into this post office and they would notice the 10 top most wanted by the FBI, and they would look on it and notice that, hey, John Berger is on the FBI's most wanted list, but they would notice that the name that was on the list would be slightly different than what the name he was going by. And so they would quickly call the police, and the police would waste no time into finding Rodney Alcala and extradite him back to California to where he could finally await trial for the crime of trying to unalive Tali Shapiro. Now, at the time, Tali Shapiro's parents, after the assault, would actually move from California to Mexico. And during the time when they were contacted that they had finally caught the man that had did this to their daughter and were taking him to trial for the crime, the parents would actually refuse to have their daughter testify against Rodney Alcala, which unfortunately was very detrimental to the trial itself, as she was the material key witness. So, therefore, they could not charge Rodney Alcala for the grape or the attempted murder on Tali Shapiro. But, however, they could charge him with child molestation, which they did. They would even tell Rodney Alcala and tell him they would give him a plea deal if he charged guilty to this charge, which he would ultimately do. And thus, Rodney Alcala would actually be charged and arrested for child molestation. However, his stay in prison would not be a very long one, where he was paroled in 1974 after only serving 34 months for the crime against Tali Shapiro.